The laughter of friends faded as I ventured further into the deep. The ocean grew darker, colder, and I felt the first bump against my leg. A fin surfaced, sleek and menacing, followed by a flash of jagged teeth. I swam for my life, but it was already too late. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start with today's shark attack story, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment letting me know where in the world you are watching from. Click the like button, and let's get into the story. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Jake Larson's alarm blared to life. He jolted awake, heart already racing with anticipation. Today wasn't just any day. It was the day he'd been waiting for his entire surfing career. The forecast promised massive swells at Mavericks, the legendary big wave surf spot just north of Half Moon Bay, California. Jake had a chance to ride the biggest wave of his life, maybe even set a personal record. 34, Jake was no rookie. He'd been surfing Mavericks for over a decade, earning respect among the tight-knit community of big wave surfers. But today felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that something monumental was about to unfold. Jake rolled out of bed, his 6 feet 2 inches frame taut with lean muscle earned from years of paddling and riding giants. He padded to the kitchen of his modest beachside apartment, brewing a strong pot of coffee as he peered out the window. The pre-dawn sky was tinged with pink and orange, but it was the ocean that held his attention. Even from here, he could see the distant swells rolling in, promising a day of epic proportions. As the coffee percolated, Jake's phone buzzed. It was his best friend and fellow surfer, Mike. "You up, bro?" Mike's excited voice crackled through the speaker. "It's going off out there." Jake grinned, pouring himself a steaming mug. "Been up since 4:30. Couldn't sleep." "You heading down soon?" "Already on my way. Tommy and Sarah are meeting us there. This is gonna be insane, man. You ready to make history?" Jake took a long sip of coffee, letting the warmth and caffeine fuel his growing excitement. "Born ready. See you in 20. After scarfing down a quick breakfast of oatmeal and banana, Jake gathered his gear. He ran his hand lovingly over his prized possession. A custom-made 10 feet 2 inches gun, crafted specifically for the monster waves of Mavericks. This board had seen him through countless sessions, but today it might carry him into the record books. The drive to the beach was a blur of anticipation and last-minute mental preparation. Jake had visualized this day 1,000 times, imagining himself dropping into a behemoth of a wave, feeling the rush of adrenaline as he carved along its face. But visualization was one thing. The reality of Mavericks was another beast entirely. As Jake pulled into the parking lot, he saw a crowd already gathering. News of the epic swell had spread, drawing spectators and fellow surfers alike. He spotted Mike's truck and made his way over, board under his arm. "There he is," Mike called out, clapping Jake on the back. The man of the hour. Sarah, a talented photographer who'd been documenting the Maverick surf scene for years, was adjusting her camera equipment. "Hank," she greeted him with a smile. "Ready for your close-up?" Jake laughed, but there was an edge of nervousness to it. "Let's hope I give you something worth shooting." Tommy, the youngest of their group at 28, was practically bouncing with energy. "Dude, have you seen it out there? It's macking. Biggest I've ever seen it." Jake turned his gaze to the ocean, and his breath caught in his throat. Tommy wasn't exaggerating. The waves were massive, easily 30 feet high, with some sets looking even bigger. The famous frame peak of Mavericks was clearly visible, a liquid mountain rising from the sea before crashing down with earth-shaking force. "Jesus," Jake muttered, a mix of awe and trepidation washing over him. Mike placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've got this, man. If anyone can ride these monsters, it's you." Jake nodded, forcing himself to take deep, calming breaths. This was what he'd trained for, what he'd dreamed of. The fear was there, as it always was before paddling out at Mavericks. But so was the irresistible call of the waves. As they made their way down to the beach, Jake noticed the increased security presence. The Coast Guard had a boat stationed nearby, and several jet skis were on standby for rescue operations. It was a stark reminder of the dangers that came with surfing waves of this magnitude. "All right, boys," Sarah called out, raising her camera. "Give me your best. We're not scared shitless poses." They laughed, gathering together for a quick photo. Jake tried to smile naturally, but his mind was already out there, among the swells. As they waxed their boards and performed their final gear checks, a hush fell over the beach. A set even larger than before was rolling in. The crowd gasped as the first wave reared up, easily clearing 40 feet. "That's the one, Chink," Mike said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and concern. "That's your wave." Jake swallowed hard, his heart pounding. This was the moment of truth. He turned to his friends, seeing the worry and excitement mirrored in their eyes. "Listen," he said, suddenly feeling the need to say something. "Whatever happens out there today, I want you guys to know how much your support means to me. I couldn't do this without you." Sarah lowered her camera, her expression serious. "Just come back in one piece, okay? The shot's not worth your life." Jake nodded, touched by her concern. "I'll be careful, promise." With final fist bumps and wishes of good luck, Jake began his trek into the water. The cold Pacific immediately seeped through his wetsuit, a shock to the system that helped sharpen his focus. He pushed through the shore break, feeling the power of the ocean even in these relatively calm waters. As he paddled out towards the lineup, Jake's senses went into overdrive. He could taste the salt spray in the air, feel the surging water beneath his board, hear the thunderous crash of the waves ahead. And always, there was the sight of those mountainous swells, growing larger and more intimidating with each yard he covered. Other surfers were out there too, some familiar faces and some he didn't recognize. There were nods of acknowledgement, the unspoken brotherhood of those who dared to challenge Mavericks. But as another massive set rolled through, sending most scrambling to get over the top, Jake found himself alone, perfectly positioned. This was it, his moment. He turned his board toward shore, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The wave was building behind him, a liquid skyscraper rising from the depths. Jake dug his arms into the water, paddling with everything he had. He felt the wave catch him, the surge of energy propelling him forward. With a practiced motion, he popped up to his feet, finding his balance as the world tilted crazily around him. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Jake was aware of everything: the roar of the waves, the spray of water around him, the incredible speed at which he was moving. He was riding a force of nature, dancing on the edge of disaster and glory. From the shore, his friends watched with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Sarah's camera clicked rapidly, capturing every moment of Jake's descent. Mike and Tommy shouted encouragement, their voices lost in the crash of the waves. As Jake carved along the face of the wave, he allowed himself a moment of pure joy. This was why he surfed, why he risked everything to be out here. There was nothing in the world that could compare to this feeling. But as he neared the bottom of the wave, preparing to outrun the cascading whitewater, something caught his eye. A dark shape, just beneath the surface, moving with unnatural speed and purpose. In that split second, as recognition dawned, Jake felt a primal fear unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The wave forgotten, his instincts screamed a single word: shark. The ocean, which had been his playground and passion for so long, suddenly became an alien and hostile environment. Jake had just enough time to take a gasping breath before the world exploded into chaos around him. From the shore, his friends' cheers turned to screams of horror. The perfect wave, the record-breaking ride, all of it was forgotten in an instant. As the chapter closed, the real terror was only beginning, with Jake Larson about to face a battle not just for glory, but for his very survival. Jake Larson's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the horizon, searching for the perfect wave. The swells at Mavericks were massive today, each one a liquid mountain rising from the depths of the Pacific. He'd been out here for nearly an hour, letting smaller waves pass by, waiting for the one that would cement his legacy in the big wave surfing community. "Come on," he muttered to himself, salt water dripping from his beard. "Where are you?" As if in answer to his silent plea, Jake saw it. A dark line on the horizon, growing larger by the second. This was it, the wave he'd been waiting for his entire career. Jake turned his board towards shore, his muscles tensing in anticipation. He could hear the roar of the wave building behind him, feel the water beginning to lift his board. With powerful strokes, he began to paddle, every fiber of his being focused on catching this monster. From the shore, his friends watched with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Sarah raised her camera, ready to capture what could be a historic moment. "He's going for it," Mike said, his voice tight with anxiety. "That wave's got to be at least 50 feet. Tommy squinted against the glare of the morning sun. "Maybe bigger. Jesus, I've never seen anything like it." As the wave reached him, Jake felt the surge of energy lifting his board. With a practiced motion, he popped up to his feet, finding his balance as the world tilted crazily around him. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. He was aware of everything: the roar of the wave, the spray of water around him, the incredible speed at which he was moving. "He's up," Sarah shouted, her camera clicking rapidly. "Look at him go." Jake carved along the face of the wave, a tiny figure dwarfed by the massive wall of water. He'd never felt so alive, so in tune with the ocean. This was what he lived for, what he'd risked everything to experience. As he neared the bottom of the wave, Jake prepared to cut back, to ride up the face and outrun the cascading white water. But something caught his eye, a dark shape moving just beneath the surface. In that split second, as recognition dawned, Jake felt a primal fear unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The wave forgotten, his instincts screamed a single word: shark. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Jake could see every detail with crystal clarity. The sleek gray body, easily 15 feet long, the dorsal fin cutting through the water, the black, lifeless eye as the great white rolled to the side. "No," Jake whispered, the word lost in the roar of the wave. "Please, no." From the shore, his friends' expressions changed from excitement to confusion, then to horror as they realized what was happening. "Shark!" Mike screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "There's a shark!" Sarah lowered her camera, her hands shaking. "Oh my God, Jake!" The great white struck with terrifying speed and force. Jake felt a searing pain in his left leg as the shark's jaws clamped down, its rows of serrated teeth tearing through his wetsuit and into flesh and bone. Jake's scream of agony was cut short as he was yanked off his board and pulled beneath the surface. The world became a chaotic blur of bubbles and blood. He could feel the shark shaking him violently, like a dog with a chew toy. Instinct and adrenaline took over. Jake began to punch and claw at the shark's eyes and gills, desperate to break free. His lungs burned, screaming for air. Just when he thought he couldn't hold his breath any longer, the shark's grip loosened. Jake kicked frantically with his uninjured leg, propelling himself towards the surface. He broke through with a gasping breath, coughing and sputtering. "Help!" he screamed, his voice hoarse and filled with pain and terror. "Help me!" On the beach, chaos had erupted. Mike was already sprinting towards the water, grabbing a nearby longboard. "Mike, don't!" Sarah yelled, torn between the instinct to help and the knowledge of the danger. The shark's still out there. Tommy was on his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed emergency services. "We need help at Mavericks," he shouted into the phone. "Shark attack. Send everyone. Coast Guard, paramedics, everyone." Jake could see his friends on the shore, could hear their distant shouts, but they seemed a million miles away. He was alone out here, bleeding in shark-infested waters. He began to swim towards shore, each stroke sending waves of agony through his mangled leg. But he'd only made it a few yards when he felt it, the unmistakable presence of the shark, circling back for another attack. "No, please!" Jake whimpered, his earlier bravado completely shattered. He was no longer a renowned surfer, no longer a man testing his limits against nature. He was prey, pure and simple, fighting for his life against one of nature's most perfect predators. The shark's dorsal fin broke the surface, circling closer. Jake could see flecks of his own blood on its snout. He knew he couldn't outswim it, not with his injured leg. His only hope was to fight. As the shark made another pass, Jake lunged forward, driving his fingers into its eye. The shark thrashed violently, its tail smacking Jake's chest with bruising force, knocking the wind out of him. For a moment, Jake slipped beneath the surface again. The underwater world was eerily quiet compared to the chaos above. He could see his blood dispersing in the water, a cloud of red billowing around him. And there, just yards away, was the shark, turning for another attack. With the last of his strength, Jake kicked towards the surface. As his head broke through, he heard a new sound, the roar of a jet ski engine. "Jake!" It was Mike's voice, filled with desperation. "Grab on!" The jet ski appeared beside him, Mike leaning over with an outstretched hand. Jake reached out, his fingers brushing Mike's, but then he felt it, the horrifying sensation of teeth sinking into his torso. The shark had returned, determined not to let its prey escape. Jake's scream was blood-curdling. "It's got me!" he shrieked. "Oh God! It's got me!" Mike, his face a mask of terror and determination, leaned further over the jet ski. "Hold on, Jake. Don't let go." The water around them churned red with blood. Jake could feel himself being pulled under, the shark's powerful body thrashing as it tried to drag him into the depths. In that moment, suspended between life and death, between the surface and the abyss, Jake Larson's life flashed before his eyes. He saw his first surfboard, a birthday gift when he was 10. He saw his first trophy, his first big wave at Mavericks. He saw the faces of his friends, his family. With a surge of desperate strength, Jake clawed at Mike's arm, his nails digging in deep enough to draw blood. Mike winced but held on, revving the jet ski's engine. "Come on," Mike yelled, his voice raw with effort. "Fight, Jake. Fight." The tug of war seemed to last an eternity. Jake could feel his consciousness slipping, the edges of his vision growing dark. The pain was overwhelming, his body going into shock. And then, suddenly, the pressure released. Whether the shark had let go voluntarily or been scared off by the jet ski, Jake didn't know. All he knew was that he was free. With the last of his strength, he pulled himself onto the back of the jet ski, collapsing behind Mike. His blood quickly covered the seat, spilling into the churning water below. "I've got you," Mike said, his voice choked with emotion. "Hold on, Jake. Just hold on." As Mike gunned the engine, speeding towards shore, Jake's world faded to black. The last thing he heard was the wail of approaching sirens, growing louder as consciousness slipped away. The perfect wave, the record-breaking ride, all of it was forgotten. As Chapter 2 came to a close, Jake Larson's fight was far from over. The descent into terror had begun, and the long, painful journey back to the surface, both literally and figuratively, lay ahead. The roar of the wave filled Jake's ears as he rode the face of the monster swill. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for his entire career. The 50-foot wall of water propelled him forward with terrifying speed, adrenaline coursing through his veins. From the shore, his friends watched in awe. Sarah's camera clicked rapidly, capturing every moment of Jake's historic ride. "Holy shit," Mike breathed, his eyes wide. "He's actually doing it." Tommy hooped and hollered, pumping his fist in the air. "Go, Jake. Ride that beast." For a brief, glorious moment, Jake felt invincible. He was on top of the world, carving a path down the face of one of the biggest waves ever surfed at Mavericks. This was what he lived for: the rush, the danger, the pure exhilaration of pushing himself to the absolute limit. But in the blink of an eye, everything changed. As Jake neared the bottom of the wave, preparing to outrun the cascading whitewater, He caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. A dark shape, moving with terrifying speed and purpose, just beneath the surface. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Jake's mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Couldn't be. Not here. Not now. But there was no denying the sleek gray body, easily 15 feet long, the dorsal fin cutting through the water like a knife. And then, as the great white rolled to the side, Jake saw its eye black, lifeless, and fixed directly on him. Shark! The word tore from Jake's throat, a primal scream of terror that was immediately swallowed by the roar of the wave. On the beach, the mood shifted in an instant. Sarah lowered her camera, her hands shaking. "Oh my God," she whispered, her face draining of color. Mike squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. What's happening? Why did he? And then he saw it too. "Shark!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with fear. "There's a shark!" The great white struck with horrifying speed and force. One moment Jake was atop his board. The next he was yanked violently into the churning water. A searing white-hot pain exploded in his left leg as the shark's jaws clamped down. Rows of serrated teeth tearing through his wetsuit, flesh, and bone. Jake's scream of agony was cut short as he was pulled under. The world became a chaotic blur of bubbles, blood, and thrashing limbs. He could feel the shark shaking him violently, like a dog with a rag doll. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but years of experience in big wave surfing kicked in. Jake knew that if he gave in to the fear, he was dead. Fighting against the pain and terror, he began to punch and claw at the shark's eyes and gills. The water around him turned red with his blood. Jake's lungs burned, screaming for air. Just when he thought he couldn't hold his breath any longer, the shark's grip loosened. With a surge of desperate strength, Jake kicked towards the surface with his uninjured leg. He broke through with a gasping breath, coughing and sputtering. "Help!" he screamed, his voice hoarse and filled with pain. "Somebody help me!" On the beach, chaos had erupted. Mike was already sprinting towards the water, grabbing a nearby longboard. "Mike, don't!" Sarah yelled, torn between the instinct to help and the knowledge of the danger. The shark's still out there. Tommy was on his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed emergency services. "We need help at Mavericks," he shouted into the phone. "Shark attack. Send everyone, Coast Guard, paramedics, everyone." Out in the water, Jake was fighting for his life. He began to swim towards shore, each stroke sending waves of agony through his mangled leg. But he'd only made it a few yards when he felt the unmistakable breeze. NCE of the shark, circling back for another attack. "No, please," Jake whimpered, his earlier bravado completely shattered. He was no longer a renowned surfer, no longer a man testing his limits against nature. He was prey, pure and simple, fighting for his life against one of nature's most perfect predators. The shark's dorsal fin broke the surface, circling closer. Jake could see flecks of his own blood on its snout. He knew he couldn't outswim it, not with his injured leg. His only hope was to fight. As the shark made another pass, Jake lunged forward, driving his fingers into its eye. The shark thrashed violently, its tail smacking Jake's chest with bruising force, knocking the wind out of him. For a moment, Jake slipped beneath the surface again. The underwater world was eerily quiet compared to the chaos above. He could see his blood dispersing in the water, a cloud of red billowing around him. And there, just yards away, was the shark, turning for another attack. With the last of his strength, Jake kicked towards the surface. As his head broke through, he heard a new sound, the roar of a jet ski engine. "Jake!" It was Mike's voice, filled with desperation. "Grab on!" The jet ski appeared beside him, Mike leaning over with an outstretched hand. Jake reached out, his fingers brushing Mike's, but then he felt the horrifying sensation of teeth sinking into his torso. The shark had returned, determined not to let its prey escape. Jake's scream was blood-curdling. "It's got me," he shrieked. "Oh God, It's got me. Mike, his face a mask of terror and determination, leaned further over the jet ski. Hold on, Jake. Don't let go. The water around them churned red with blood. Jake could feel himself being pulled under, the shark's powerful body thrashing as it tried to drag him into the depths. In that moment, suspended between life and death, between the surface and the abyss, Jake Larson's life flashed before his eyes. He saw his first surfboard, a birthday gift when he was 10. He saw his first trophy, his first big wave at Mavericks. He saw the faces of his friends, his family. With a surge of desperate strength, Jake clawed at Mike's arm, his nails digging in deep enough to draw blood. Mike winced but held on, revving the jet ski's engine. "Come on," Mike yelled, his voice raw with effort. "Fight, Jake. Fight." The tug of war seemed to last an eternity. Jake could feel his consciousness slipping, the edges of his vision growing dark. The pain was overwhelming, his body going into shock. And then, suddenly, the pressure released. Whether the shark had let go voluntarily or been scared off by the jet ski, Jake didn't know. All he knew was that he was free. With the last of his strength, he pulled himself onto the back of the jet ski, collapsing behind Mike. His blood quickly covered the seat, spilling into the churning water below. "I've got you," Mike said, his voice choked with emotion. "Hold on, Jake. Just hold on." As Mike gunned the engine, speeding towards shore, Jake's world began to fade. He was vaguely aware of the commotion on the beach, people running, shouting, the wail of approaching sirens growing louder. Sarah and Tommy were at the water's edge, their faces pale with shock. As Mike brought the jet ski in, they rushed forward to help. "Oh my God, Jake," Sarah sobbed, her hands hovering over his mangled body. Unsure where to even begin to help, Tommy was already stripping off his shirt, using it to try and stem the flow of blood from Jake's leg. "Stay with us, man," he urged, his voice shaking. "The ambulance is almost here. You're gonna be okay." But Jake could barely hear them. The world was growing dim, the pain fading to a dull, distant throb. As paramedics swarmed around him, their voices urgent but indistinct, Jake's last conscious thought was of the ocean. The ocean, which had been his playground and passion for so long, had turned against him in the most violent way imaginable. As darkness claimed him, Jake wondered if he would ever be able to look at the water the same way again if he survived to see it at all. The perfect ways, the record-breaking ride, all of it was forgotten in the wake of nature's brutal reminder of man's place in the food chain. As Jake Larson slipped into unconsciousness, his fight was far from over. The attack was ended, but the true battle for his life, his leg, and his very identity as a surfer was only just beginning. The world came back to Jake in fragments, flashes of light, muffled voices, and an all-encompassing pain that seemed to radiate from every cell in his body. He was vaguely aware of movement, of hands touching him, of urgent voices speaking in medical jargon he couldn't comprehend. "DP's dropping, we need to move now." Multiple lacerations, severe tissue damage to the left leg and lower abdomen, possible arterial bleed, prep for immediate transfusion. Jake tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but all that came out was a weak groan. A face swam into view, a paramedic, her expression tense but professional. "Mr. Larson, can you hear me? You're in an ambulance. We're taking you to the hospital. Try to stay calm." Stay calm? Jake wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. How could he stay calm when his entire world had just been shattered by rows of razor-sharp teeth? The ambulance lurched, and a fresh wave of agony washed over Jake. He cried out, his back arching off the stretcher. He was going into shock. Someone yelled, "Push more fluids." Jake's mind reeled, trying to make sense of what had happened. One moment he had been on top of the world, riding the wave of his life. The next, the memory of the shark's lifeless black eye filled his vision, and he began to hyperventilate. "Mr. Larson, I need you to try and slow your breathing," the paramedic said, her voice firm but kind. "You're safe now. We're doing everything we can to help you." Safe? Jake wanted to scream. How could he ever feel safe again? But he couldn't find the words. The pain was overwhelming, threatening to drag him back into unconsciousness. As the ambulance raced towards the hospital, Jake drifted in and out of awareness. He caught snippets of conversation, fragments of the frantic efforts to keep him alive. Call ahead to the OR. They need to be ready the moment we arrive. Blood loss is critical. We might lose the leg if we don't get him there soon. Lose the leg. The words pierced through Jake's fog of pain and shock. Lose the leg? No, that couldn't happen. He was a surfer. He needed both legs. Without them, who was he? No. Jake managed to croak, his voice barely audible. Trees? My leg. The paramedic leaned in close. We're doing everything we can, Mr. Larson. But right now, we need to focus on saving your life. One step at a time. Okay? Jake wanted to argue to make them understand how important this was. But he was so tired. The darkness was creeping in again. And this time, he didn't have the strength to fight it. The next time Jake opened his eyes, he was in a different place. The harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital room greeted him, along with the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of disinfectant. Jake? Can you hear me? He turned his head slightly, wincing at the effort. Mike was there, looking haggard and worried. Sarah and Tommy stood behind him, their faces pale and drawn. What? Jake tried to speak, but his throat was dry and raw. Sarah stepped forward, offering him a small cup of water with a straw. Here, take small sips. The cold liquid was a blessed relief. After a few moments, Jake tried again. What happened? How long? Mike ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. You've been in and out for about 36 hours, man. The doctors, they weren't sure you were going to make it for a while there. The memories came flooding back, the wave, the shark, the desperate struggle in the water. Jake's heart rate spiked, the monitor beside him beeping more rapidly. My leg, he said, sudden fear gripping him. They said, in the ambulance, they might have to. His friends exchanged a look, and Jake felt his stomach drop. Chink, Tommy said gently. The doctors did everything they could, but Jake didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to know, but he had to muck. With trembling hands, he reached for the blanket covering his lower body. Wait, Sarah said. Maybe we should get the doctor first. But Jake wasn't listening. He pulled back the covers, and for a moment, his brain couldn't process what he was seeing. Where his left leg should have been, starting just above the knee, there was nothing, just empty space and bandages. No, Jake whispered, his voice breaking. No, no, no. The monitor beside him began to beep frantically as Jake's breathing quickened. The room seemed to spin around him. Nurse, Mike called out, pressing the call button. We need help in here. A team of medical staff rushed in, quickly assessing the situation. Jake was barely aware of them, lost in a spiral of panic and grief. Mr. Larson, a doctor's voice cut through the chaos. I need you to try and calm down. Your body has been through a tremendous trauma. This level of stress isn't good for your recovery. Jake turned to the doctor, his eyes wild. My leg, he choked out. You took my leg. The doctor's expression was sympathetic but firm. We had no choice, Mr. Larson. The damage was too severe. If we hadn't amputated, you would have died. I know this is a shock, but right now, we need to focus on your overall recovery. But Jake couldn't focus on recovery. All he could think about was everything he had lost. His leg, his career, his identity as a surfer. It was all gone, taken by the ocean he had loved so much. Jake, Sarah said softly, taking his hand. I know this seems impossible right now, but you're alive. You survived something most people wouldn't have. That has to count for something, right? Jake wanted to believe her. He wanted to feel grateful for his survival. But all he felt was a crushing sense of loss and a fear of what the future held. As the medical team worked to stabilize him, Jake's mind drifted back to the attack. He could still feel the shark's teeth tearing into his flesh, still see that cold, black eye staring at him. The memory was so vivid, so terrifying, that he began to shake uncontrollably. "He's having a panic attack," one of the nurses said. "We need to sedate him." "No," Jake protested weakly, but it was too late. He felt a cold rush in his fore, and the world began to fade once more. As consciousness slipped away, Jake was left with the haunting realization that his struggle was far from over. The physical battle might have been won, he was alive, after all, but the psychological war was just beginning. How could he ever return to the water after this? How could he face the ocean that had both given and taken so much? The darkness took him again, but this time, it wasn't the peaceful oblivion of before. Instead, Jake's dreams were filled with churning water, flashing teeth, and the terrible certainty that no matter how fast he swam, the shark was always right behind him. The struggle to survive the attack was over. But for Jake Larson, the struggle to reclaim his life, to find a new identity in the wake of this tragedy, was only just beginning. And as he drifted in a sea of sedative-induced sleep, one question echoed in the depths of his mind. Would he ever be strong enough to face those demons and find his way back to the surface? The chaos at Mavericks Beach was unlike anything the local surfing community had ever seen. News of Jake's attacks spread like wildfire, drawing a crowd of horrified onlookers, fellow surfers, and emergency personnel. The once peaceful shoreline now buzzed with frantic energy and palpable fear. Mike's jet ski cut through the churning waters. The unconscious and bleeding form of Jake Larson slumped against his back. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of adrenaline and sheer terror driving him forward. Every second counted, and Mike knew that Jake's life quite literally hung in the balance. As he neared the shore, Mike shouted at the top of his lungs, "Clear the way! We need a medic!" The crowd on the beach parted like the Red Sea, creating a path for the incoming jet ski. Sarah and Tommy, their faces ashen with shock, sprinted towards the water's edge. "Oh my God!" Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she caught sight of Jake's mangled body. "Tommy, help me!" Together, they waded into the surf, ready to assist as Mike brought the jet ski to a stop in the shallows. The water around them began to turn a sickening shade of red as Jake's blood mixed with the foam. "Careful," Mike warned as they reached for Jake. "His leg. It's bad. Really bad." With utmost care, they lifted Jake's limp form from the jet ski. His wetsuit was in tatters, revealing deep, jagged wounds that made even the most hardened surfers turn away in horror. Jake's left leg was barely recognizable as a limb, hanging on by what seemed like threads of skin and muscle. As they carried him up the beach, Jake stirred slightly, a weak moan escaping his lips. "Jake? Jake? Can you hear me?" Sarah called, her voice cracking with emotion. "Stay with us. Okay? Help is coming." The wail of approaching sirens cut through the air, growing louder by the second. A team of paramedics burst onto the scene, their faces set with grim determination. "What happened?" the lead paramedic demanded, already assessing Jake's injuries with practiced efficiency. Mike, still dripping wet and shaking from the ordeal, struggled to find his voice. "Shark attack," he managed. "Great white. It came out of nowhere." The paramedic nodded, his expression grave. "All right, we need to move fast. He's lost a lot of blood." He turned to his team. "Start 2 large bore IVs, push fluids, and prepare for immediate transport. We need to get him to the trauma center ASAP." As the medical team worked feverishly to stabilize Jake, a Coast Guard helicopter thundered overhead, its rotors whipping up sand and spray. On the horizon, a Coast Guard cutter could be seen racing towards the beach, responding to the emergency call. Sarah, her clothes now stained with Jake's blood, stood back and watched helplessly as the paramedics fought to save her friend's life. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Tommy, his face a mask of worry and guilt. "I should have been out there with him," Tommy said, his voice barely audible over the commotion. "Maybe if I had," Sarah shook her head, cutting him off. Don't. There's nothing you could have done. That shark. It was just too big, too fast. A few yards away, a local lifeguard was speaking urgently into his radio. We need to clear the waters immediately. All beaches within a 10-mile radius need to be closed. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. The gravity of the situation was sinking in for everyone present. This wasn't just about Jake anymore. The presence of such a large, aggressive shark so close to shore posed a threat to every surfer, swimmer, and beachgoer in the area. As the paramedics prepared to move Jake to the waiting ambulance, he suddenly regained consciousness, his eyes flying open in panic. The shark, he croaked, trying to sit up despite his injuries. It's still out there. The lead paramedic gently but firmly pushed Jake back down. Sir, you need to stay still. You're safe now, but you've been seriously injured. We're taking you to the hospital. Jake's eyes darted wildly from face to face, eventually settling on Mike. Mike, he gasped, reaching out with a bloodied hand. The wave. Did I make it? Mike felt his heart break at the question. Even now, teetering on the brink of death, Jake's mind went to the ride, the perfect wave that had turned into a nightmare. Yeah, buddy? Mike lied, forcing a smile through his tears. You nailed it. Best ride I've ever seen. A ghost of a smile flickered across Jake's pale face before his eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness once more. We're losing him, one of the paramedics shouted. Start CPR. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic activity. The paramedics worked tirelessly, performing chest compressions and administering emergency medications as they loaded Jake into the ambulance. As the doors slammed shut and the ambulance tore away, sirens blaring, an eerie silence fell over the beach. The adrenaline of the rescue attempt began to wear off, leaving behind a heavy, oppressive sense of dread. Sarah, Mike, and Tommy stood together, shell-shocked and covered in blood that wasn't their own. The magnitude of what had just happened was slowly sinking in. Do you think he'll make it? Tommy asked, his voice small and scared. Mike ran a hand through his hair, leaving streaks of red. He has to, he said more to himself than the others. He's the strongest person I know. If anyone can survive this, it's Jake. Sarah couldn't bring herself to speak. She stared out at the ocean, at the waves that continued to roll in, indifferent to the tragedy that had just unfolded. The same waves that they had all loved, that had been such a central part of their lives, now seemed alien and menacing. A local news crew had arrived on the scene, their camera already rolling as a reporter approached the group. Excuse me, the reporter began, microphone in hand. Can you tell us what happened here? Was this a shark attack? Mike stepped forward, placing himself between the reporter and his friends. Not now, he said firmly. Our friend is fighting for his life. Have some respect. As the reporter backed off, a new commotion arose near the water. A team of marine biologists had arrived, setting up equipment to monitor shark activity in the area. We need to tag and track this shark, one of the scientists was saying. If it's as large as the witnesses claim, it could pose a significant threat to the entire coastline. The reality of the situation was sinking in for everyone present. This wasn't just about one surfer's tragic encounter. The entire community was now on high alert, the carefree atmosphere of the beach replaced by a palpable sense of fear and uncertainty. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the beach, Sarah, Mike, and Tommy finally allowed themselves to be led away by concerned friends. They had given their statements to the authorities, watched as warning signs were erected along the shoreline, and fielded countless questions from worried fellow surfers. But as they left the beach, each of them knew that nothing would ever be the same. The rescue attempt was over, but the real struggle for Jake's life, for the safety of their community, and for their own relationship with the ocean they loved, was only just beginning. The waves continued to roll in, powerful and relentless, a reminder of nature's indifference to human tragedy. And somewhere out there, In the depths of the Pacific, a great white shark swam on, unaware of the chaos it had left in its wake. The wail of sirens pierced the air as the ambulance tore through the streets of Half Moon Bay, carrying the broken and battered body of Jake Larson. Inside, a team of paramedics worked feverishly, their movements precise and urgent as they fought to keep Jake alive. BP's dropping again, one of the EMTs called out, her voice tight with tension. We need to push more fluids. The lead paramedic, a veteran named Steve, barked orders as he worked. Increase the FOR rate. And where's that blood? We need to start transfusing now. Jake lay unconscious on the stretcher, his skin ashen and clammy. The makeshift tourniquet on his mangled leg was soaked through with blood, a stark reminder of the brutality of the shark attack. Every bump and turn of the ambulance sent fresh rivulets of crimson streaming from his wounds. In the passenger seat, another paramedic was on the radio with the hospital. This is Ambulance 17 en route with a critical shark attack victim. Male, mid-30s, severe trauma to the left leg and abdomen. Massive blood loss. ETA 8 minutes. We need trauma and vascular surgery teams ready on arrival. Back on the beach, Mike, Sarah, and Tommy stood in shocked silence, watching as the ambulance disappeared from view. The gravity of the situation was slowly sinking in, leaving them feeling hollow and helpless. Sarah was the first to break the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to go to the hospital. Jake shouldn't be alone when he... She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Mike nodded, running a hand through his salt-crusted hair. Yeah, Dad, you're right. Tommy, can you drive? I don't think I... Tommy nodded, already fishing his keys from his pocket. Of course, let's go. As they turned to leave, a commotion near the water caught their attention. A group of surfers had gathered, pointing out to sea and shouting, "The shark! It's back!" Mike's blood ran cold. He jogged over to the group, squinting against the glare of the setting sun. There, about 100 yards offshore, he saw it, the unmistakable dorsal fin of a great white shark, cutting through the waves. Jesus, he breathed. It really is massive. A lifeguard was already on his radio, his voice urgent. We need immediate shark patrol. Great white sighted off Mavericks, estimated 15 to 18 feet. All beaches need to be cleared and closed immediately. As the beach erupted into chaos, with lifeguards herding people away from the water and Coast Guard vessels racing towards the scene, Mike felt a tugging on his arm. Mike, we need to go, Sarah insisted, her eyes pleading. Jake needs us. Tearing his gaze away from the ocean, Mike nodded. You're right. Let's get out of here. The drive to the hospital was tense and silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The image of Jake's mangled body, the memory of his agonized screams, played on repeat in their minds. And the hospital, they burst through the emergency room doors, only to be met with a flurry of activity. Medical staff rushed back and forth, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of urgent commands. Where is he? Mike demanded, grabbing the arm of a passing nurse. Jake Larson, shark attack victim. Where did they take him? The nurse gently but firmly removed Mike's hand. Sir, if you're not family, I can't. We're his emergency contacts, Sarah interjected, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Please, we need to know what's happening. The nurse's expression softened slightly. You've been taken directly to surgery. The trauma team is working on him now. I'm sorry, but that's all I can tell you at the moment. You'll need to wait in the family room, and someone will update you as soon as possible. As they were led to a small, sterile waiting room, the reality of the situation began to truly sink in. This wasn't just a bad dream they could wake up from. Their friend, their brother in all but blood, was fighting for his life just a few rooms away. Hours passed, feeling like an eternity. Coffee was consumed, paced back and forth, and prayers were muttered by those inclined to do so. The waiting room television droned on in the background, the local news already running stories about the attack. One of the worst shark attacks in California history. A reporter was saying, standing on the beach they had left just hours ago. The victim, identified as local surfer Jake Larson, is currently in critical condition. Tommy angrily jabbed the power button, plunging the room into silence. "Nultures," he muttered. "They don't even know if he's going to make it, and they're already turning it into a spectacle." Sarah placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "They don't matter right now. All that matters is Jake." Just then, the door opened, and a tired-looking surgeon in blood-stained scrubs stepped in. The three friends jumped to their feet, hearts pounding. "Are you here for Jake Larson?" the surgeon asked, his voice grave. Mike nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The surgeon sighed, removing his cap. "Mr. Larson survived the surgery, but his condition is still extremely critical. The shark caused massive trauma to his left leg and lower abdomen. We've managed to control the bleeding, but..." He paused, and in that moment, they all knew what was coming next. "We had to amputate his left leg above the knee. The damage was too severe. There was no way to save it. I'm sorry." The words hit them like a physical blow. Sarah let out a choked sob, while Tommy slumped back into his chair, head in his hands. Mike, however, remained standing, his voice hoarse as he asked, "But he's alive? He's going to make it?" The surgeon's expression was guarded. "The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical. He's lost a tremendous amount of blood, and there's a high risk of infection. We're doing everything we can, but I need you to understand, he's not out of the woods yet." As the surgeon continued to explain Jake's condition and the long road of recovery ahead, Mike's mind wandered. He thought of all the waves they had surfed together, of Jake's infectious laugh and unstoppable determination. And now, in the blink of an eye, it had all changed. "Can we see him?" Sarah asked, her voice small and fragile. The surgeon nodded. Briefly, "He's in the ICU, and he's heavily sedated. Talk to him, let him know you're there. It might help." As they were led to Jake's room, the beeping of monitors and the hiss of oxygen machines filled the air. And there, in the center of it all, lay Jake. He was almost unrecognizable. His body swathed in bandages, tubes, and wires. His left leg, or what remained of it, was elevated, the stark absence below the knee a shocking reminder of the day's events. Sarah was the first to approach, gently taking Jake's hand in hers. "Hey, Jake," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "We're here. You're not alone. Okay? You're going to get through this. You have to." Tommy stood at the foot of the bed, his face a mask of guilt and anguish. "I'm so sorry, man," he murmured. "I should have been out there with you. Maybe if I had." Mike cut him off, his voice firm despite the tears in his eyes. "Don't. This isn't anyone's fault. Jake knew the risks. We all do, every time we paddle out." As they stood vigil by Jake's bedside, the world outside continued to spin. News of the attack spread like wildfire, dominating local headlines and sparking heated debates about beach safety and shark conservation. Back at Mavericks, a team of marine biologists had been dispatched to track and study the shark responsible for the attack. Their boats crisscrossed the area, using advanced sonar and tracking devices to try and locate the massive predator. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the lead researcher, stood at the bow of the main research vessel, her eyes scanning the choppy waters. "Any signs?" she called out to her team. Her assistant, Tim, shook his head. "Nothing yet, but given the size of the shark described by witnesses, it has to still be in the area." Elena nodded, her expression grim. "We need to find it, not just for the safety of the public, but to understand why it attacked. Great whites don't typically go after humans. Something about this doesn't add up." As the research team continued their search, the local surfing community gathered at a nearby beach bar, the Rusty Nail. The mood was somber, a far cry from the usual boisterous atmosphere. To Jake, one of the older surfers said, raising his glass, The gnarliest son of a bitch to ever paddle outed Mavericks. To Jake, the group echoed, clinking their glasses together. Conversations buzzed around the room, a mix of shock, anger, and fear. They ought to hunt that shark down, one surfer growled. It's a man-eater now. It'll strike again. That's not how it works, another argued. Sharks don't develop a taste for human flesh. It was probably just confused. Thought Jake was a seal or something. Confused? The first surfer scoffed. Tell that to Jake when he wakes up missing a leg. The bartender, a weathered old waterman named Frank, slammed his hand on the bar, silencing the argument. Enough. Jake's fighting for his life right now. This ain't the time for pointing fingers or making threats. We're a community, damn it. We need to stick together. As the night wore on, the conversation turned to more practical matters. How would Jake cope with the loss of his leg? Could he ever surf again? How would he pay for his medical bills and rehabilitation? We should start a fundraiser, someone suggested. Jake's given so much to this community. It's time we gave back. The idea took hold, and soon plans were being made for benefit concerts, charity surf contests, and online crowdfunding campaigns. In the face of tragedy, the tight-knit surfing community was rallying around one of their own. Back in the hospital, Mike, Sarah, and Tommy continued their vigil. They took turns sitting with Jake, talking to him, reminiscing about old times, and promising him a future he might not even live to see. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the hospital windows, Jake's monitors suddenly erupted in a cacophony of alarms. Code Blue. We need a crash cart in here now, a nurse shouted, rushing into the room. Mike, Sarah, and Tommy were ushered out, watching in horror as a team of doctors and nurses swarmed around Jake's bed, working frantically to save his life. Come on, Jake, Mike whispered, his forehead pressed against the glass of the ICU door. Don't you dare give up now. Fight, damn it. Fight. As the medical team battled to bring Jake back from the brink, the sun rose over Half Moon Bay, casting a golden glow across the waves that had nearly claimed his life. The ocean, as always, remained indifferent to the human drama unfolding on its shores. The race against time continued, with Jake's life hanging in the balance. And somewhere out in those waters, a great white shark continued to prowl, unaware of the chaos it had caused and the lives it had forever altered. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor buzzed overhead as Mike paced back and forth, his shoes squeaking on the polished linoleum floor. Sarah sat hunched in a plastic chair, her face buried in her hands, while Tommy leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on the closed doors of the intensive care unit. The tension in the air was palpable as they waited for news on Jake's condition. It had been hours since the code blue alarm had sent them into a panic, and the uncertainty was eating away at them. Finally, the door swung open, and Dr. Reeves, Jake's lead surgeon, emerged. His face was etched with exhaustion, but there was a glimmer of relief in his eyes. He's stable, Dr. Reeves announced, and a collective sigh of relief echoed through the hallway. It was touch and go for a while there, but Jake's a fighter. We've managed to get him back on track. Sarah stood up, her legs shaky. Can we see him? Dr. Reeves nodded. Briefly. He's still heavily sedated, but talking to him might help. Just prepare yourselves. His recovery is going to be a long and challenging process. As they entered Jake's room, the gravity of the situation hit them anew. Jake lay motionless, surrounded by a maze of tubes and wires. The stump of his left leg was elevated, a stark reminder of all he had lost. Mike approached the bed, gently placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave us quite a scare there, but you're gonna be okay. You hear me? You're gonna get through this." Sarah took Jake's hand, careful not to disturb the 4 lines. "We're all here for you, Jake. The whole community is rallying behind you. You're not alone in this fight." As they spoke to their unconscious friend, a nurse entered the room, checking Jake's vitals and adjusting his medication. "How's he really doing?" Tommy asked her, his voice low. The nurse's expression was sympathetic but honest. "He's holding his own, which is remarkable given what he's been through. But the road ahead is going to be tough, physically and emotionally." Outside the hospital, news of Jake's survival had spread quickly. A small crowd had gathered, holding signs of support and leaving flowers. Local news vans were parked nearby, reporters eager for any updates on the shark attack victim's condition. Back at Mavericks Beach, the atmosphere was surreal. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the breeze, cordoning off the shoreline. Signs had been erected warning of shark activity, their bold red letters a stark contrast to the serene blue of the ocean beyond. Dr. Elena Rodriguez and her team of marine biologists were still out on the water, their boats crisscrossing the area in search of the great white responsible for the attack. "Any luck with the acoustic receivers?" Elena called out to her assistant, Tim. He shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. "Nothing concrete. We've picked up a few large shark signatures, but nothing matching the size of the one that attacked Jake." Elena frowned, scanning the horizon. "It has to still be in the area. A shark that size doesn't just disappear." She paused, considering their next move. "Let's expand our search radius and get in touch with the local fishermen. They might have seen something we've missed." As the research team continued their hunt, the local surfing community was grappling with the aftermath of the attack. The Rusty Nail, usually a hub of post-surf beers and banter, had transformed into an impromptu command center for support efforts. Frank, the grizzled old bartender, was coordinating with a group of surfers, his usually gruff demeanor softened by concern for Jake. "All right, listen up," he called out, silencing the chatter. "We've got the benefit concert set for next weekend. Marty's band is headlining, and we've got a few other local acts lined up. Sarah's sister is handling the online donations. Now, what else can we do?" A young surfer named Kai raised his hand. "What about a paddle out? To show solidarity and stuff?" Frank nodded approvingly. "Good idea, kid. We'll organize it for the day after the concert. Make it a whole weekend thing." As the planning continued, the door to the bar swung open, and a man in a crisp suit entered. The chatter died down as all eyes turned to the newcomer. "Can I help you?" Frank asked, his tone wary. The man stepped forward, pulling out a business card. "Jack Winters, Oceanic Adventures LLC. I'm here to talk about Jake Larson." Frank's eyes narrowed. "What about him?" Winters smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're interested in acquiring the rights to Jake's story. Shark attack survivors are big business these days. Documentaries, book deals, speaking engagements. We could make him a very wealthy man." A tense silence fell over the room. Then, with surprising speed for a man his age, Frank vaulted over the bar and grabbed Winters by the collar. "Now you listen here, you vulture," Frank growled, his face inches from the startled businessman. "Jake's fighting for his life right now. He's lost his leg, maybe his career, and you want to swoop in and profit off his pain? Get the hell out of my bar before I throw you out myself." Winters stumbled backwards, straightening his tie. "You're making a mistake. This could set Jake up for life. Think about the medical bills. Stay out." The collective roar from the assembled surfers left no room for argument. Winters beat a hasty retreat, the door slamming behind him. Frank took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he poured himself a shot of whiskey. "Nulchers," he muttered. "They're already circling." Back at the hospital, Jake was showing signs of regaining consciousness. His eyelids fluttered, and a low groan escaped his lips. "Jake?" Sarah leaned in, her voice urgent. "Jake, can you hear me?" Slowly, Jake's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening. He blinked, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. What happened?" he croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. Mike stepped forward, relief and apprehension warring on his face. "You're in the hospital, buddy. There was an accident." Jake's brow furrowed as fragments of memory began to surface. The waves, the dark shape in the water, the searing pain. His eyes widened in sudden panic. The shark. Where? My leg. He tried to sit up, crying out as pain lanced through his body. Easy, easy, Dr. Reeves said, gently but firmly pushing Jake back onto the bed. You've been through a severe trauma, Mr. Larson. You need to stay still. Jake's breathing was ragged, his eyes darting frantically around the room. My leg, he repeated, his voice breaking. I can't feel my leg. The room fell silent, the weight of what was to come hanging heavy in the air. Dr. Reeves took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation he'd had too many times in his career. Mr. Larson, Chunk, he began, his tone gentle but direct. The shark caused severe damage to your left leg. We did everything we could, but we had to amputate above the knee to save your life. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He stared at Dr. Reeves, then at his friends, searching their faces for some sign that this was all a terrible mistake. But he saw only confirmation in their pained expressions. No, Jake whispered, shaking his head. No, Beal, lo. His voice rose, panic and denial taking over. You're lying. This can't be happening. Sarah moved to comfort him, but Jake recoiled, his eyes wild with fear and anger. Don't touch me. Just leave me alone. All of you. As Jake's monitors began to beep alarmingly, Dr. Reeves made a quick decision. I'm going to give him something to calm him down, he said, reaching for a syringe. This is a normal reaction, but in his condition, we can't risk him aggravating his injuries. As the sedative took effect, Jake's agitated movements slowed, and his eyes grew heavy. My leg, he murmured, a tear sliding down his cheek. What am I going to do? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Jake drifted back into unconsciousness. His friends stood in stunned silence, the reality of the long and difficult road ahead finally sinking in. Outside the hospital room, life went on. The sun set over Half Moon Bay, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Surfers caught their last waves of the day, casting wary glances at the deeper waters. And somewhere out there, a great white shark continued its silent patrol, unaware of the lives it had irrevocably changed. The aftermath of the attack was only beginning to unfold, its ripple spreading far beyond Jake's hospital room. For Jake, his friends, and the entire surfing community, nothing would ever be the same again. The pre-dawn mist clung to the surface of the water as Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research vessel cut through the gentle swells. The boat's powerful engines hummed, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had fallen over Mavericks Beach in the days following Jake's attack. Elena stood at the bow, her eyes scanning the horizon. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights she'd spent coordinating the search efforts. Behind her, her team bustled about, checking equipment and monitoring various instruments. Anything on the hydrophones? Elena called out to her assistant, Tim. He shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. Nothing conclusive. We've picked up a few large signature. Yes, but nothing matching the size of our target. Elena sighed, running a hand through her salt-stiffened hair. The great white that had attacked Jake seemed to have vanished into the vast expanse of the Pacific. But she knew better. A shark that size couldn't simply disappear. All right, let's try the chum slick again, she decided, and ready the tagging gear. If we can get a tracker on this thing, we might finally get some answers. As the team prepared to deploy their bait, a crackling voice came over the radio. Research vessel, this is Coast Guard Cutter Barracuda. We've got a possible sighting about 2 miles northwest of your position. Azer. Elena's heart raced as she grabbed the radio. Copy that, Barracuda. We're on our way. Out. She turned to her crew, a renewed sense of urgency in her voice. You heard them, people. Let's move. The research vessel changed course, cutting through the waves with increased speed. As they neared the coordinates provided by the Coast Guard, Tension on the boat reached a fever pitch. "There!" Tim shouted, pointing off the starboard bow. "Dorsel fin, den okluk." Elena rushed to the side, binoculars in hand. Her breath caught in her throat as she focused on the massive triangular fin cutting through the water. "My God," she whispered. "It really is as big as they said." The great white's dorsal fin alone was nearly 3 feet tall, signaling a shark of truly monstrous proportions. As it cruised past the boat, its full length became apparent, easily 18 feet, possibly larger. "Ready the tagging gun," Elena ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We might not get another chance at this." As her team scrambled to prepare the equipment, Elena's mind wandered to Jake, lying in his hospital bed. The devastation wrought by this animal was undeniable, but as a marine biologist, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at its power and majesty. "Guns ready, Doc," one of her assistants called out, snapping her back to the present. Elena took the tagging gun, its weight familiar in her hands. She'd tagged dozens of sharks over her career, but never one this size, never one with such significance. "Steady," she murmured, more to herself than to her team. The great white's massive form glided just beneath the surface, oblivious to the commotion it had caused. Elena took a deep breath, steadied her aim, and fired. The tag struck true, embedding itself in the shark's dorsal fin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a powerful thrust of its tail, the great white dove deep, disappearing from view. A cheer went up from the crew, but Elena remained focused. "Start tracking that signal," she ordered, "and someone get on the horn to the Coast Guard. We need to coordinate our efforts." As the day wore on, the research team followed the shark's movements, mapping out its territory and behavior patterns. It was clear that this wasn't just a random visitor to the area. This great white had made Mavericks its hunting ground. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Jake was grappling with the harsh reality of his new existence. Physical therapy sessions had begun, each one a grueling reminder of what he had lost. "Come on, Jake," his therapist Maria encouraged. "Just a few more steps. You're doing great." Jake gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to maintain his balance on the parallel bars. His arms shook with the effort of supporting his weight, the absence of his left leg a constant, aching void. "I can't," he gasped, his remaining leg buckling beneath him. "It's too much. I can't do this." Maria was at his side in an instant, helping him into his wheelchair. "You can and you will," she said firmly. "Rome wasn't built in a day, Jake. This is a marathon, not a sprint." Jake laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, I'm not much of a runner these days, am I?" The joke fell flat, the pain behind it too raw, too real. Maria squeezed his shoulder gently. "It's okay to be frustrated, Jake, but don't give up. You've got too much fight in you for that." As Maria wheeled him back to his room, Jake caught sight of his reflection in a passing window. The man staring back at him was a stranger, pale, gaunt, with haunted eyes and a leg that ended abruptly mid-thigh. He quickly looked away, unable to reconcile this broken image with the strong, confident surfer he had once been. In his room, he found Mike waiting, a forced smile on his face and a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Hang, buddy," Mike said, trying to inject some cheer into his voice. "How was PT?" Jake grunted non-committally as he transferred himself from the wheelchair to the bed. "Same as always. Painful, humiliating, and pointless." Mike's smile faltered. He hated seeing his friend like this. Angry, bitter, a shell of his former self. "Come on, man. You can't think like that. You're making progress every day." Jake's eyes flashed with anger. "Progress? Is that what you call this?" He gestured angrily at the empty space where his left leg should have been. "I'm half the man I used to be, Mike." Literally. Mike opened his mouth to respond, but Jake cut him off. "Just don't, okay? I don't need your pity or your platitudes. I just want to be left alone." A tense silence fell over the room. Mike fidgeted with the newspaper, unsure of how to proceed. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Knock. I know you probably don't want to hear this right now, but there's something you should know." Jake raised an eyebrow, his expression wary. "What?" Mike hesitated, then unfolded the newspaper. The front page bore a large photo of a great white shark, its massive jaws agape. The headline read, "Maverick's Monster. Hunt continues for record-breaking shark." Jake's face drained of color as he stared at the image. His hands began to shake, and his breathing quickened. "They think they found it," Mike explained softly. "The shark that, well, they're trying to tag it, track its movements." For a long moment, Jake said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "How big?" Mike swallowed hard. "They're estimating 18 to 20 feet. Maybe bigger. It's one of the largest great whites ever recorded in this area." Jake closed his eyes, his jaw clenched tight. The memory of that massive shape in the water, the flash of teeth, the searing pain, it all came flooding back. "Get out," he said, his voice trembling. "Jake, I said get out," Jake shouted, grabbing the nearest object, a plastic water pitcher, and hurling it across the room. It shattered against the wall, water and ice scattering across the floor. Mike retreated, hands raised in surrender. Okay, I'm going. Or Jake, we're here for you, man. All of us. When you're ready to talk, we'll be waiting." As the door closed behind Mike, Jake let out a primal scream of frustration and anguish. Tears streamed down his face as he pounded his fists against the bed, raging against the unfairness of it all. A nurse rushed in, alerted by the commotion. "Mr. Larson, please, you need to calm down. You will tear your stitches." But Jake was beyond reason. The dam had broken, and all the fear, anger, and grief he'd been holding back came pouring out in a torrent of emotion. It took 2 orderlies and a dose of sedative to finally calm him down. As the drum took effect, Jake's world began to blur at the edges. His last conscious thought before slipping into a drug-induced sleep was of the ocean, once his greatest love, now the source of his deepest terror. Miles away, on the open water, Elena and her team continued their vigil. The tagged shark had led them on a meandering path, its movements painting a picture of its hunting grounds and habits. As night fell, Elena stood on the deck, staring out at the moonlit waves. The gravity of their mission weighed heavily on her. This wasn't just about scientific discovery anymore. It was about public safety, about giving a traumatized community some peace of mind. "We'll find you," she murmured to the unseen predator lurking beneath the waves. "And when we do, we'll make sure you can never hurt anyone again." The hunt continued, a delicate balance between scientific inquiry and the primal urge for retribution. And somewhere in the vast, dark waters of the Pacific, a great white shark, nature's perfect predator, swam on, oblivious to the chaos it had caused in the world above. As the research vessel cut through the night, its instruments quietly tracking the movements of the tagged shark, the ocean kept its secrets. The hunt was far from over, and the true test for Jake, for the community, and for humanity's relationship with one of nature's most fearsome creatures, was only just beginning. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment filled Jake's hospital room, a constant reminder of his fragile state. Sunlight streamed through the half-drawn blinds, casting long shadows across the sterile space. Jake lay in bed, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, counting the tiles for what felt like the 1,000th time. A soft knock on the door broke his trance. "Come in," he called out, his voice hoarse from disuse. Sarah entered, a forced smile on her face and a vase of flowers in her hands. "Check. Thought I'd brighten up the place a bit." Jake managed a weak smile. "Thanks. It's good to see you." Sarah set the flowers down and took a seat beside the bed. An uncomfortable silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared trauma. Finally, Sarah spoke. "How are you feeling today?" Jake let out a bitter laugh. "How am I feeling? I'm down a leg. My career is over. and I'm terrified of the thing I used to love most in the world. How do you think I'm feeling?" Sarah flinched at his harsh tone but pressed on. "I know it's hard, Jake, but you're alive. That's something to be grateful for, isn't it?" Jake turned his head away, unable to meet her gaze. "Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better if—" "Don't—" Sarah cut him off, her voice sharp. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. We almost lost you once. I can't bear the thought of—" Her voice trailed off as tears welled up in her eyes. Jake felt a pang of guilt, realizing how his words must have sounded. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean. It's just hard, you know? Everything's changed, and I don't know how to deal with it." Sarah took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not alone in this, Jake. We're all here for you, and there are people who can help. Therapists, support groups." Jake nodded, though the idea of talking to strangers about his experience made him uncomfortable. "Maybe. I'll think about it." Just then, Dr. Reeves entered the room, a clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Jake. How are we doing today?" Jake shrugged. "Same as yesterday, I guess. When can I get out of here?" Dr. Reeves pulled up a chair. "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. Your physical recovery is progressing well. The wounds are healing nicely, and there's no sign of infection. I think we can start talking about discharge plans." A mix of relief and anxiety washed over Jake. The idea of leaving the hospital was both liberating and terrifying. What happens next?" he asked hesitantly. "Well, you'll need to continue with intensive physical therapy," Dr. Reeves explained, "and we'll get you set up with a prosthetist to start the process of fitting you for an artificial limb. It's going to be a long road, Chink, but with hard work and dedication, you can regain a great deal of mobility." Jake nodded, trying to process the information. "And the ocean? Will I ever be able to?" Dr. Reeves' expression softened. "Returning to surfing is a possibility, Jake. There are adaptive surfing programs and specialized prosthetics designed for water sports, but that's further down the line. For now, let's focus on your immediate recovery." As the doctor continued outlining the rehabilitation plan, Jake's mind wandered. He thought of the waves at Mavericks, of the rush of riding a perfect barrel. Would he ever experience that again? Could he ever look at the ocean without seeing teeth and blood? "Jake, are you with us?" Dr. Reeves' voice snapped him back to reality. "Yes, Ari. It's just a lot to take in." The doctor nodded understandingly. "I know it is, which is why I also want to strongly recommend that you speak with our psychologist. Trauma like this affects more than just the body, Jake. It's important to take care of your mental health as well." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but Sarah squeezed his hand. "Please, Jake, just give it a try." After a moment's hesitation, Jake nodded. "All right, I'll talk to someone." As Dr. Reeves left, promising to send the psychologist by later that day, Jake felt a strange mix of hope and dread. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time since the attack, he could see a glimmer of a future. Meanwhile, out on the Pacific, the hunt for the great white continued. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the deck of her research vessel, binoculars trained on the horizon. The tagged shark had led them on a meandering path over the past few days, revealing a territory that stretched far beyond what they had initially anticipated. "Any updates from the acoustic receivers?" Elena called out to her assistant, Tim. He shook his head. "Nothing new in the last hour. It's like it's gone silent." Elena frowned. "That's unusual. Check the satellite tag data. Maybe it's gone deep." As Tim hurried to comply, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Great whites were known to dive to impressive depths, but the prolonged silence from both the acoustic and satellite tags was concerning. Suddenly, an alarm blared from the ship's communication system. "Incoming call from Coast Guard," the radio operator announced. Elena rushed to the bridge, her heart racing. "This is Dr. Rodriguez. Go ahead, Coast Guard." A tense voice crackled over the radio. "Dr. Rodriguez, We've received reports of a possible shark sighting near Cowell Beach in Santa Cruz. Matches the description of your target. Elena's blood ran cold. Cowell Beach was a popular surf spot, often crowded with beginners and families. If the shark had indeed traveled that far south. "We're on our way," she replied, already barking orders to her crew. "Alert the local authorities. Get that beach cleared now." As the research vessel changed course, racing towards Santa Cruz, Elena couldn't help but think of Jake. The devastation wrought by this animal was undeniable, but as a scientist, she was torn. The opportunity to study such a large, seemingly territorial great white was unprecedented. But at what cost? Back at the hospital, Jake was in the middle of his first session with Dr. Lydia Chen, the staff psychologist. The tension in the room was palpable as Jake struggled to open up about his experience. "I know this is difficult, Jake," Dr. Chen said gently, "but talking about the attack can help you process what happened." Jake clenched his fists, fighting back the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "What's there to process? I went surfing, a giant shark tried to eat me, and now I'm half the man I used to be. End of story." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression compassionate but firm. "Is that really how you see yourself now? Half a man?" The question hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, to his horror and shame, he began to cry. Dr. Chen handed him a box of tissues, waiting patiently as Jake struggled to regain his composure. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, wiping his eyes. "I don't know where that came from." "Don't apologize," Dr. Chen replied. "This is a safe space, Jake. It's okay to let your emotions out here." Taking a deep breath, Jake began to speak. He talked about the attack, about the terror he felt when he saw the shark, about the pain and the certainty that he was going to die. He talked about waking up in the hospital and learning he had lost his leg. And he talked about the fear and anger that had been consuming him ever since. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Surfing was my life, my identity. Without it, I'm lost." Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. "It's natural to feel that way after such a life-altering event. But Jake, you are more than just a surfer. You're a friend, a son, a member of your community. Your identity isn't defined solely by what you do, but by who you are as a person." Jake pondered her words, a small spark of hope igniting in his chest. How do I find myself again?" "It's a process," Dr. Chen explained. "It will take time and effort, but the first step is acknowledging that your life has changed and allowing yourself to grieve for what you've lost. Only then can you start to build a new future for yourself." As the session continued, Jake felt a weight begin to lift from his shoulders. He wasn't magically healed, far from it, but for the first time since the attack, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could find a way forward. Miles away, on Cowell Beach, chaos erupted as lifeguards ordered everyone out of the water. Panicked swimmers and surfers scrambled for shore as Coast Guard vessels patrolled the area. Elena's research boat arrived on the scene, immediately deploying hydrophones and other detection equipment. "Anything?" Elena asked urgently, her eyes scanning the water. Tim shook his head. "Nothing definitive. Wait. Here. Acoustic signature. 500 yards off the point." Elena grabbed her binoculars, focusing on the area Tim had indicated. For a moment, all was still. Then, a massive dorsal fin broke the surface. "My God," Elena breathed. It really did come this far south. As they watched, the great white circled lazily, seemingly unbothered by the commotion it had caused. Its sheer size was awe-inspiring, a reminder of the raw power of nature. "What do we do now, Doc?" Tim asked, his voice tinged with a mix of fear and excitement. Elena took a deep breath, weighing their options. This was an unprecedented opportunity to study one of the largest great whites ever recorded in the area. But the safety of the public had to come first. "We observe," she decided, "track its movements, gather as much data as we can. But we also work with the authorities to keep people safe. This isn't just about science anymore. It's about coexistence. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the water, Elena couldn't help but feel a sense of melancholy. The shark they were tracking was a marvel of evolution, a perfect predator doing what nature had designed it to do. But it had also caused immeasurable pain and suffering. In that moment, Elena made a silent promise to Jake, to the community, and to the shark itself. She would find a way to protect both humans and this magnificent creature. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. For the sake of science, for the sake of safety, and for the delicate balance between man and nature. As night fell, the great white slipped beneath the waves, disappearing into the darkness. But Elena and her team remained vigilant, ready to face whatever challenges the new day would bring. The hunt continued, but its purpose had evolved. It was no longer just about finding a shark. It was about finding a way forward for all of them. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Jake Larson wheeled himself onto the balcony of his beachfront apartment. The salt-tinged air filled his lungs as he gazed out at the ocean, its surface glittering in the early morning light. It had been 6 months since the attack, and this was the first time he'd allowed himself to look at the water without turning away in fear. And no, CK at the door broke his reverie. "It's open," Jake called out, not taking his eyes off the waves. Mike entered, a thick manila envelope tucked under his arm. "Morning, buddy. You're up early." Jake turned his wheelchair to face his friend, a wry smile on his face. "Couldn't sleep. Today's the day, isn't it?" Mike nodded, his expression a mix of concern and anticipation. "Yeah, the official report from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. You sure you're ready for this?" Jake took a deep breath, steeling himself. "As ready as I'll ever be. Let's get this over with." They moved to the living room, where Jake transferred himself from the wheelchair to the couch with practiced ease. Physical therapy had been grueling, but he'd made significant progress. The prosthetic leg leaning against the wall was a testament to that. He was getting better at using it every day, though he still preferred the chair for longer periods. Mike sat beside him, breaking the seal on the envelope. "You want me to read it, Dia?" "No," Jake said firmly. "I need to do this myself." With slightly trembling hands, Jake took the report and began to read aloud. "Official report on the shark attack incident at Mavericks Beach, Half Moon Bay, California. Date of incident, June 15, 2024. Victim, Jake Larson, 34 years old. Male species involved, Carcharodon carcharias, great white shark. Executive summary. On the morning of June 15, 2024, professional surfer Jake Larson was attacked by a great white shark while surfing at Mavericks Beach. The attack resulted in severe injuries to Mr. Larson's left leg, ultimately requiring amputation above the knee. This report aims to provide a comprehensive analysis of the incident, including eyewitness accounts, expert opinions, and recommendations for future safety measures. Incident details. At approximately 7:45 a.m., Mr. Larson was observed catching a large wave, estimated to be 30-40 feet in height. Witnesses report that as Mr. Larson neared the bottom of the wave, a large shark breached the surface and attacked him, pulling him off his board and into the water. The attack lasted approximately 45 seconds, during which time Mr. Larson fought back, striking the shark's eyes and gills. A fellow surfer, Michael Torres, rescued Mr. Larson using a jet ski, bringing him to shore where emergency medical services were waiting. Shark identification and analysis. Based on bite radius measurements taken from Mr. Larson's surfboard and injuries, as well as eyewitness descriptions, the shark is estimated to have been a female great white, approximately 18-20 feet in length. This size is exceptional, placing it among the largest great whites ever recorded in the area. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, lead marine biologist for the California Shark Research Program, provided the following statement. "The shark involved in this incident appears to be an anomaly in terms of its size and behavior. Great whites of this magnitude are extremely rare, especially in coastal waters. The aggressive nature of the attack is also unusual, as great whites typically do not target humans as prey. Jake paused, his voice catching. Mike placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. "You okay, man? We can take a break if you need to." Jake shook his head. "No, I need to finish this." He took a deep breath and continued reading. Possible factors contributing to the attack. 1. Mistaken identity. The shark may have mistaken Mr. Larson for a seal or sea lion, its natural prey. 2. Investigatory bite. The initial bite may have been exploratory, but the shark's size resulted in severe damage. 3. Territorial behavior. Recent studies suggest that some great whites may exhibit territorial behavior in certain areas. Post-incident shark activity. In the months following the attack, the shark believed to be responsible was successfully tagged and tracked by Dr. Rodriguez's team. Its movements revealed a large territory spanning from Half Moon Bay to Santa Cruz. The shark's presence in the area has raised concerns about public safety and the need for improved monitoring systems. Recommendations. 1. Enhanced shark monitoring. Implement a comprehensive shark monitoring system along the coastline, using a combination of aerial surveys, acoustic receivers, and real-time tracking technology. 2. Public education. Develop and distribute educational materials about shark behavior, risk factors, and safety measures for ocean users. 3. Emergency response training. Provide specialized training for lifeguards and first responders in dealing with shark-related incidents. Singer. Review of current protocols. Reassess and update existing shark warning systems and beach closure procedures. Conclusion. The shark attack on Jake Larson was a rare and unfortunate event. While the risk of shark attacks remains statistically low, this incident highlights the need for continued research, improved safety measures, and public education about coexisting with marine wildlife. The Department of Fish and Wildlife extends its deepest sympathies to Mr. Larson and commends the bravery of those involved in his rescue. We remain committed to protecting both human safety and marine ecosystems. Jake lowered the report, his hands shaking slightly. A heavy silence filled the room as both men absorbed the clinical breakdown of that life-altering day. "So that's it," Jake said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My whole life changed because of a case of mistaken identity." Mike leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "How are you feeling, man?" Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "How am I feeling? I don't know, Mike. Angry? Scared? Relieved that at least now I have some answers? Take your pick." He wheeled himself back to the balcony, staring out at the ocean. The waves that had once been his playground now seemed alien and menacing. "You know what the worst part is?" Jake said, not turning around. "I miss it. God help me. Even after everything that happened, I miss being out there." Mike joined him on the balcony, leaning against the railing. "That's not the worst part, Jake. That's the best part. It means you're still you. The ocean's in your blood, man. Always has been, always will be." Jake looked up at his friend, a mix of emotions playing across his face. "But how can I ever go back in? Every time I close my eyes, I see those teeth. Seal that pain. One day at a time," Mike said gently. "You've already come so far, Jake. 6 months ago, you couldn't even look at the water without having a panic attack. Now look at you." Jake nodded, acknowledging the truth in Mike's words. His recovery, both physical and mental, had been a long, arduous journey. There had been setbacks, moments of despair when he'd wanted to give up, but somehow he'd persevered. "I spoke to Sarah yesterday," Mike continued, a hint of excitement in his voice. "She told me about this adaptive surfing program down in San Diego. They work with amputees, help them get back in the water. What do you think?" Jake's heart raced at the idea. The thought of surfing again both thrilled and terrified him. I don't know, Mike. That's a big step." "It is," Mike agreed. "But you don't have to decide right now. Just think about it. Okay?" As they stood there, watching the waves roll in, a comfortable silence fell between them. Jake's mind wandered to the great white that had changed his life. Was it still out there, patrolling these waters? The report had mentioned it was tagged and tracked. What had they learned? As if reading his thoughts, Mike spoke up. You know, that Dr. Rodriguez, the shark expert? She's giving a presentation at the Marine Institute next week, talking about her research on the shark that, well, might be interesting to go if you're up for it. Jake considered the idea. Part of him wanted to know everything he could about the creature that had nearly killed him. Another part wanted to forget it ever existed. But he knew that wasn't possible. This shark, this experience was now a part of him, for better or worse. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I think I'd like to go. Mike grinned, clapping Jake on the shoulder. That's my boy. Baby steps, right? Jake nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Baby steps. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time since the attack, he could see a future beyond his trauma. The ocean stretched out before him, vast and mysterious as ever. It had taken so much from him, but Jake realized it had also given him something, a new perspective, a deeper appreciation for life, and a strength he never knew he possessed. Hey Mike, Jake said, turning to his friend. Thanks for everything. Mike smiled, understanding all that was left unsaid. Anytime, brother, anytime. As they stood there, two friends united by tragedy and resilience, the waves continued their eternal dance with the shore, and somewhere out in those waters, a great white shark swam on, an awesome and terrible reminder of nature's power and the delicate balance between man and sea. The official report may have concluded, but Jake's story, his journey of recovery, adaptation, and rediscovery, was far from over. It was in many ways just beginning.